with water bottles, but just the passion. We will be very far as a nation, but that aside, it's business today, one day to 2022, and here we are. I mean, why are we doing business today? Because each and every single day, business does matter. My name is Nokip Kimboy, and today, actually, we had earlier on my colleague Brenda Kerubo did an interview with Treasury Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yattani on the state of the economy. He spoke on a myriad of issues, and we'll be looking at this particular interview, actually a part of it, and later on look at some of the misses that maybe the Cabinet Secretary would have addressed in this particular interview. So without wasting much time, let's begin with this particular snippet from the interview that Brenda Kerubo had with Ukur Yattani, Cabinet Secretary Treasury, on matters state of the economy. Let's listen in.
Hospitality sector has really recovered tremendously. You can tell, you can feel. You go to the hotels, you'll see that, life is back, people are back on jobs. The supply chain is now, normalized, and as a result of the tourism is back. The sectors of manufacturing zone, in most parts of the country, again, we have fairly good rainfall, although we are experiencing drought in the northern Kenya. The net sum of all this is that it enables, and the coping mechanism. People are they are not used to COVID. They protect themselves. They take precautions. All the necessary protocols are observed, and as a result of this, people can still, work, deliver, but sometimes also protect themselves. Last year, it was something new, something unheard. There's too much panic. There's too much heavy investment. There's curfew, no consumption, and you can see now, even at the government level, because the more the consumption, the more the revenue. People consume fuel, people consume food, they consume beer, they consume this and that. And as a result of this, even our projection in terms of revenue performance has been surpassed consistently for the last number of months. This is very good. These are very good indicators. And we are also quite surprised that in the quarter 2 of GDP assessment, we performed 10.1. The growth was at 10.1% of GDP, unheard of since independence. We are not sure whether we are going to sustain, but we are looking at a projection of about 6% of GDP for this year. That is very good. Coming from that position to this position is very good. That means now more jobs, more opportunities, more consumption, more revenue, and therefore, we'll be able to now do things better, deliver more in terms of service delivery, even get money for investment in new projects and the rest. That's why we are quite optimistic. I know we are not out of the wood yet. You never know the metamorphosis of this challenge of COVID. Now we are dealing with another strain. We never know what kind of form that will come later on. So we should not lose our guard.
Can the economy actually hold severe restrictions like we had before? Lockdown and curfews? It
may, but it depends on the dictator of the time. There could be serious medical challenge that will come up than what you're experiencing now. And if the cost of now saving lives can be anything, that might come. But it's my prayer that we are going to avoid that situation of going back to last year and even part of this year, where the containment measures had a serious negative effect on the economy. We hope we'll not go that direction.
CS Yattani, we talk about debt, and every time we have this conversation with you this year, I think we've spoken about debt a couple of times, and yet again we still have to talk about it. When you look at the budget policy statement, there are indications that, the Treasury is moving more towards borrowing locally. So you're talking about domestic debt. What are some of the measures that are being taken in place to ensure that we don't crowd out the private sector?
We do not borrow for the sake of, just borrowing to pay salaries or to engage in recurring, but we borrow for investment in the infrastructure sector to provide development and also better service delivery. That is the trajectory of our development path. Now, In doing this, then there will be obligation on us to pay to service the loan and to service at a level. Sometimes, we borrow from various windows. The multilateral window, this is now World Bank, African Development Bank, IMF, international organizations, whose interest, the loans are very favorable. Sometimes 0% interest, sometimes 1%, sometimes even less than 1%. And I want to assure you that, for the last 2.5 years, close to 3 years, we have now borrowed at the commercial rate. We borrowed from the multilateral window. And we are given very concessional terms. In some cases, 10 years of grace period and repayment over 30 years at a rate of 1% or 1.4%. This is good because we need this money to support the economy, particularly at a time when we are faced with the challenge of COVID. That is the direction we are going. But we also have realized that Kenyans have been asking questions about borrowing. And when we borrow, generally, we borrow from the domestic market, but we also borrow also from the foreign market. And when we borrow, externally, we are borrowing, using hard currency. Sometimes when there's volatility of the exchange rate, there will be need to provide for slight margin for the repayment of this. But that does not necessarily mean that these are costly, is expensive, money. So in the domestic market, our divide is usually a 50-50. We borrow because our banks, there are people with money in the banks, and the public is not also borrowing. Then we borrow this money at an interest rate that is quite competitive. Like now, the Treasury bill has been at an average of about 7%. When we do this, then we are able to support certain expenditures that's going to support, the economy, but also deliver on services. They've been perception or they've been claimed that, we are crowding out the private sector. Not necessarily. As a government, we have also come up with very good terms. We've initiated a credit guarantee scheme that now will enable and we persuade the SMEs, the private sector, to borrow from banks. And the responsibility of the National Treasury is to cushion in case of default.
All right, that is the Cabinet Secretary Treasury, Ukur Yattani. I want to bring in economist and lead economist at Mentoria, Ken Gishinga, who is listening into this interview.